The diner smelled of fresh coffee and pancakes when Jack Walker slid into the booth with his little girl, Emily. He was a single dad, a quiet man in his late 30s with kind eyes that hid the storms of his past. Most people in town only knew him as the guy who fixed cars at the local garage. Very few knew about the tattoo on his forearm, a simple dagger with wings, something he usually kept covered. Emily, all of 8 years old, was chattering away about her school project, and Jack listened with a patient smile. For him, moments like this were gold. After years overseas, years of darkness and danger, this was the life he fought for. Peace, pancakes, and his daughter's laughter. But peace never lasts long. The diner door slammed open, and in walked Rick Mason, the town bully. Everyone knew him. A big man with a mean streak, fueled by cheap beer and too much pride. He noticed Jack immediately, sitting there quietly, and for reasons only bullies understand, he decided that today Jack would be his target. Rick swaggered over, his voice loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Nobody. Look at you sitting here like life's all perfect. Bet your wife left you 'cause you couldn't man up." Emily froze. Jack gently reached for her hand under the table, squeezing it, his eyes never leaving Rick. "Not in front of my daughter," Jack said calmly. "But bullies don't understand calm." Rick sneered, leaned closer, and with a sudden crack, the sound echoed through the diner. He slapped Jack across the face. Plates rattled. People gasped. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Jack didn't move. He didn't strike back. He just stared at Rick, a strange stillness in his expression. And as the room held its breath, Rick noticed something. The edge of Jack's sleeve had slipped, revealing that tattoo. A dagger with wings. One of the older men at the counter, a retired Marine, dropped his coffee cup with a clatter. His voice shook when he whispered, "Delta Force." The color drained from Rick's face. Suddenly, he wasn't standing in front of a quiet mechanic anymore. He was standing in front of a man who had served in one of the most elite special operations units in the world. A man who had been trained for missions nobody ever talked about. The kind of missions that didn't make the news. Jack leaned forward, his voice low, controlled. "You think being tough means hitting a man in front of his little girl. Let me tell you something, Rick. Real strength isn't in your fists. It's in protecting the people who can't protect themselves. It's in knowing when not to fight." Rick's bravado crumbled. He stumbled back, muttering something, then hurried out of the diner, leaving behind only silence and the smell of burnt bacon. Jack turned back to Emily, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You okay, pumpkin?" She nodded, her little hands clutching his. The old Marine from the counter came over, eyes shining with respect. "Son," he said softly, "you don't owe this town an explanation. But I want you to know, I saw what you did. You chose restraint. That's the hardest kind of bravery." Jack gave a humble smile. "I've seen enough violence for one lifetime. My daughter deserves better." The word spread quickly after that day. People began to see Jack differently. Not just as the quiet mechanic, but as a man who carried both the weight of war and the grace to rise above it. Some even said the diner felt safer whenever he was there, like his presence alone kept trouble at bay. And Emily, she looked at her dad with new eyes that day, not as just her father, but as her hero. Not because he was a Delta Force legend, not because people whispered about his past, but because when it mattered most, he chose love over anger. And in that simple choice, he showed everyone what true strength really is. The diner slowly returned to life, but something had shifted. Conversations were quieter, glances longer. People weren't just looking at Jack anymore, they were seeing him. Not the grease-stained mechanic shirt, not the quiet smile. They saw the man who'd faced violence and still chose peace. Emily slid out of the booth and climbed onto her dad's lap. "Daddy," she whispered, "why didn't you hit him back? He was so mean." Jack wrapped his arms around her and kissed the top of her head. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, walking away is harder than fighting. And the people who really know what violence feels like, they're the ones who try the hardest not to use it." Emily thought about that, her small brow furrowed. Then she nodded, as if her young heart understood more than her years should allow. The old Marine at the counter still hadn't moved. Finally, he stood, his hand trembling as he reached out to Jack. "I was in Fallujah," he said quietly. "We lost good men there. If you were Delta, then men like me, men like us, we made it home because of men like you." Jack shook his head humbly. "No, sir. I just did my part." But that simple exchange didn't go unnoticed. Every eye in the diner caught it. For the first time, Rick Mason wasn't the story people carried out with them. It was Jack Walker. Later that night, as Jack tucked Emily into bed, she asked another question. "Daddy, are you really a hero?" Jack paused, his heart tightening. He thought of the missions, the faces of brothers he'd lost, the nightmares that still came. A hero. He didn't feel like one. Heroes were the ones who didn't come back. He sat on the edge of her bed and brushed her hair gently. "No, Pumpkin, I'm just your dad. And that's the best thing I'll ever be." Emily smiled, hugged him tight, and whispered, "You're my hero." Jack's eyes burned with tears, but he held her close, silently promising that no matter what shadows lived in his past, he would always be her light. The days turned into weeks, and the story of that diner incident spread across town. But it wasn't the slap people remembered. It was the stillness, the discipline, the quiet lesson. Parents told their kids. Veterans nodded silently to Jack in passing. Even the sheriff came by the garage one afternoon just to shake his hand. Rick Mason. He kept his head down. Some said he moved away a few months later. Others said he started showing up at church quieter, less loud. Maybe shame changes a man, or maybe the memory of those steady eyes across a diner table did. But the real change wasn't in Rick. It was in everyone else. People started treating each other with a little more kindness. The town diner even put up a small framed picture on the wall, not of Jack, but of a quote.